Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and I just got back from the new film Oldboy. Joe Duscent, played by Josh Brolin, an advertising executive who is kidnapped and held prisoner for 20 years in solitary confinement. After he is suddenly released, he goes on a mission to find the person who imprisoned him and finds out that the guy who imprisoned him is playing a game with him, and he's trying to figure out what exactly that guy is up to. This is a remake of the 2003 South Korean film. When I was watching this film, I thought about the film Let Me In, which was a remake of the film Let the Right One In. The way they're adapting these foreign films into English language, more, I guess, Hollywood films, is usually made with kind of a lot of arrogance on the part of these Hollywood filmmakers, that they don't really necessarily have to be very creative. I mean, with Let Me In and Oldboy, they're pretty much just remaking the film in much worse fashion. I kind of wish when they're adapting a foreign film they do like what The Magnificent Seven did, which took Akira Kurosawa's Seven Samurai, which is an absolute classic, and remade it into The Magnificent Seven. Now, The Magnificent Seven, certainly not as good as Seven Samurai, but it's at least creative in its adaptation. The filmmakers kind of just roughly adapting it, making it more American, and completely redoing whole sequences almost. This film seems to really rely on the 2003 original film. It likes to reference that film. It'd probably be hard to watch this and not have seen the 2003 film because it often references that film quite a bit. Certain things just seem odd references, like there's a point where when they walk by, the camera shows an octopus in a fish tank, but the whole dumplings thing seemed odd because, like, why wouldn't you make that more American food? Why have all this Asian culture and Asian food going on in this film? Like, what are you trying to exactly say with that? You know, wouldn't it be interesting if it was like, oh, well, he was fed this particular kind of cheeseburger every day, or particular kind of pizza, or, you know, something American to substitute it. The way Spike Lee directs this is far more work for hire than usually. I feel like when he did like Inside Man was more of a Hollywood film from him, but it felt like a Spike Lee film, but a Spike Lee directed Hollywood film. It still shows he's very technically gifted. Storytelling wise, I think it shows a lot of his weaknesses, and it's like kind of shows where he is in his career that he would just take on something like this. This just feels like a studio is like, well, we have the rights to this, and, you know, it feels like this should have been done at this point. Many people have failed to try to make a US version of Oldboy, Steven Spielberg and Will Smith included. It just feels kind of a mess because, like, if it wanted to be its own thing, why rely so heavily on the 2003 film? You know, why reference that film at all? I don't know who exactly would completely enjoy this film, because if you were interested in this film, it feels like you would have to have not have seen the original, and the original is pretty widely seen. So why recreate so much of that original? Why not try to make your own kind of film? And that was like the same thing with Let Me In. It shows a lot of laziness and arrogance, but then, like, why even make them then? You know, what's exactly the point artistically and or even commercially? You know, it seems very muddled, and that's why artistically I think it's muddled. Spike Lee does try to kind of one-up the hammer fight sequence, but just technically, you know, sure, it's a cool sequence, but it's nowhere near as memorable as the sequence in Oldboy. It just feels like he's trying to one-up the original film. Like, what's the point in that? Sure, it's like I'm a snotty film critic person, and I guess I'm supposed to just like hate on these just because of their mere existence. But the thing is, I like The Magnificent Seven. I don't like it as much as Seventh Samurai, which is a tall order. And I never really thought this would be better than the original 2003 film. But I would like to see an American studio remake a foreign film and do it in a very different way. And that, I think, would go over much better and would be interesting. I don't know how you would do Oldboy any differently, but I don't think in making it completely American and not so indebted to its 2003 source, and this is an actual remake, it's not a different version of the manga, by the way. I don't exactly get what they're trying to say both commercially or artistically with this film. It just kind of begs the question, what's the point in remaking these films? I kind of like Josh Brolin for whatever reason. I don't think it's one of his best roles. I do feel like he ends up being a good actor in a lot of crappy movies that I otherwise will forget about, which is unfortunate. I kind of feel like 5 years ago or so, he had a much better career than he does now. Sharlto Copley, I loved him in District 9, but I feel like everything after that has been really troubling, and this is really over the top and ridiculous, and his accent is just incredibly bizarre. It just doesn't, he seemed like a caricature of a villain and not really a villain. Elizabeth Olsen was alright. Spike Lee, he likes to pay attention to a lot of details, but he's not always paying attention to what those details add up to. He's a smart director, and I love Do the Right Thing. There's certain films of his filmography that I really like, but I feel like we're way past that at this point in his career. Extending the imprisonment sequence, and it felt like 20 minutes when he's in prison for 20 years, whereas in the original it goes by very quickly. Their interesting ideas really drive home to us that he was stuck in this place and kind of what he went through, but how many of those details really came back? And like his dinner early on with this couple, that's a point that like could have just been forgotten about. We kind of got that he was a jerk. He feels like oftentimes Spike Lee's like really nailing the point home, so we really get it. But what are you really doing with that? He's not as good of a storyteller. He's almost like a philosopher in a lot of ways, and I feel like that doesn't necessarily make him a good storyteller. When he's doing a lot of his better films, it's like at the end you learn some sort of piece of philosophy, and he's really good at doing that through a story. By default was a good storyteller by doing that. In this, like, he doesn't really know what he's doing with either, so it just kind of falls apart, and it really just shows the weaknesses in his film, how he just gets obsessed with little details that aren't really that helpful to the story. I know he wasn't happy with the cut that is released, and that's why it's called a Spike Lee film and not a Spike Lee joint. And so maybe there's a longer cut or something that's better, but this film got really grating towards the end. I knew what was going to happen, and there was no way that this film was in any way going to surprise me. And not just because I had seen the original film, just because I was so bored by it after a while. It just doesn't really have anything new about it, and it didn't feel like Spike Lee wanted to add anything new about it. It was like in competition with the 2003 film while also referencing it and also trying to do something new. And like if he had picked one of those and tried to do a different adaptation, as it stands, I think this was just a huge mistake on all fronts. Why remake this? Why do such a basic, straightforward adaptation? Looks like Spike Lee is someone who's just a work-for-hire director, someone who was, one of the best independent film directors around at the time and one of the biggest names, and now he's doing this. I can't even understand why they made it other than from an executive's bizarre view of what brand recognition is. This was more of a curiosity, really, just to see like how they would make a American version of Oldboy. So if you have seen Oldboy and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to.